next presentation is going to be about the effects and benefits of extracurricular participation. And so, ladies and gentlemen, Chris Milner.
Hi. So my name is Chris Milner. I'm an elementary music teacher at Birch Hill Elementary. And so I was going to present side by side with Mabel. She's not here today. She's out sick. But she was presenting mainly on the benefits of extracurricular activities. So I will also touch a little bit. I'll touch base on that a little bit as well. But what I focused on were how socioeconomic status, specifically students from different income backgrounds, affects the participation in extracurricular activities. So this past year, I've found, only my second year in the district, that I was seeing more students not being able to participate in my ensembles, many of which meet before school, after school, have different fees, rental costs. And I was just curious, is this a trend that's starting to are we seeing more of this? Are we seeing this, more kids, more students that are not being able to afford to participate in these activities, and why? So I just kind of started looking into, are there studies on this? And one thing I found was there was an article in the magazine The Atlantic called The Activity Gap, and what it found was that not only, as we would expect, students from a higher income level whose parents earn more have an easier access to these activities, and their participation is increasing. But at the same time, students from low income backgrounds, their participation in extracurricular is decreasing. So it's not staying consistent. There's actually a widening gap among participation in extracurricular activities. So starting out, I think it's important to know, why is this important? Why are extracurriculars important? So aside from just the soft skills that students learn, one thing that the studies I looked at talk about is, yes, they learn these soft skills, they learn leadership, they learn confidence, which are so super important, but they also have linked participation in extracurricular activities to a decreased engagement in risky behaviors. So things such as drug use, delinquency, sexual activity, those types of things. They've also found, some studies have shown a link between high academic achievement and participation in extracurricular activity. So it's important that we give equal access to all these students, because it's not just, I hate using that word extra. I hate that it's extracurricular. I mean, these things, if something benefits a student, it should be available and accessible to all students if it's going to make that much of a dramatic impact on their lives. So one thing that the study talked about is it looked at it, the Brown University Annenberg Institute did a study, and it was published in their magazine, Voices in Urban Education. And what they found was that participation in extracurricular activities among the upper middle class students has increased significantly since the 1970s. At that same time, participation in extracurricular activities among students from lower income families has decreased since the 1970s. So we're getting that wider, what they call, referred to in the article as the activity gap. The article also references the achievement gap. So the achievement gap, what they are referring to is, I got this statistic and this graph from a study published in Educational Leadership, an education journal, and it illustrated how the gap in academic achievement has grown over the last few decades. So the study looked at the gap in reading scores specifically between children from high income families. So those are families whose parents earn in the 90th percentile of the income distribution. And they looked also at those children from low-income families, so those students whose families were in the 10th percentile of the income distribution. And what they found was that the gap between these two scores in reading, not only was the gap still there, it was at a 0.9 standard deviation, but it grew 40% to a 1.25 standard deviation. So the gap was there, but it wasn't just there, it was getting wider. And so what they found is they also found that college completion rate among students from high-income families has grown significantly over the last few decades, with college completion rate among students of low-income families has stayed about the same, and the growing academic gap can be explained by several different factors. Income inequality has risen over the past 30 to 40 years. So in 1970, a family in the 90th percentile of the income distribution earned 5 times as much as the family in the 10th percentile. And then now, this family now earns 11 times that much. So the gap is widening. And if you look at the chart here, it shows you the pink bar is 400% of the above the federal poverty line, and the red is 199% or lower than the federal poverty line. And if you look at parent divorced, the pattern shows that those students who are below that line are more likely to have parents who are divorced or separated, repeated grades, parents serve time in jail, witness neighborhood violence, witness domestic violence, has a learning disability, or has a parent or guardian who has died. Oops, sorry. Skipped one. So factors leading to the achievement gap, like I said before, were the rise in income inequality. Economic success is far more dependent on educational success. So the study in the journal also showed that the gap income inequality was getting worse as well. So that was affecting it, and also economic success. So they were finding that parents who were in that lower bracket, the 10th percentile of the income distribution, were less likely to have college degrees than they were in the past. So that was also contributing to this gap that you're seeing in the achievement gap. Test scores play more of a dominant role in education policy. That has also affected test scores. Children in low-income homes are more likely than ever to be raised by a single parent with a low-level education than they have in the past. So now where I looked at it for, so the participation gap in extracurricular activities, what they found is that, like I said before, more students from the upper side of the income distribution were more than likely now to participate in extracurricular activities, and those at the bottom were less likely to participate. A shift in funding from community-based to parent-based, so districts less likely and less willing to provide funding for these extracurricular activities, and now the shift goes to the parents. You get that idea of what they refer to as paid to play. So that comes from sports specifically, but that can also be attributed to things like band, rental costs for instruments, uniform costs, fees to play. So there has been a nationwide increase in the number of programs, such as sports, that require a fee to participate. As of 2012, 61% of middle and high schools nationwide were charged a pay-to-play fee, and 19% of families who earn less than $60,000 a year have reported that their children have not participated in these sports because of the increase in fees, while only 5% of families who make more than $60,000 were reporting the same. And so I looked at how does this affect Nashua School District as we talk about the ever so popular free and reduced lunch rate. So in 2000, over the last decade, in 2007, 2008, 30.63% was what Nashua was at for the percentage of students who receive free and reduced lunch. We are now at 42.19%. It has stayed steady over the last few years, but overall, over time, it has increased significantly. So the percentage of Nashua School District students who receive free and reduced lunch has gone up almost 12% in the last decade or so. What can be done to increase extracurricular participation among students? I think continuing to fund programs such as we talked about late buses for those who can't provide, whose parents can't provide transportation for them before or after school. Things like E-Block that give students a chance to participate in school in enrichment activities. Cut back on pay-to-play fees. They really hinder the participation in these activities for students who can't afford the fees. And if you're going to say that these extracurricular activities are available for all students, they need to be available for all students. And if someone can't afford to participate in an activity, that's not the student's fault. And we need to find a way to fix this. Make staff and teachers aware of assistance and scholarship programs available to students for these. So one thing I found this fall is that when I was going over my rental students signing up for rental instruments, I found that it wasn't always necessarily a straight path to finding out how to get, like, I can't afford an instrument, what can we do? it had to go through one person, and then that person had to go through the rental company. And it wasn't always clear what the path was. So I think being aware of how we can help these families, like at the classroom, at the school level, as opposed to at the administrative level, I think is really helpful. I know that I would find it helpful as a music teacher. The other thing I found is that at the elementary level, there aren't necessarily late buses. There aren't, it's harder to do something like e-block, but I think looking at what can be done to get students into these activities now, because I know that once a student stops participating in something at my level, I always check back with them when I see, I mean, even this year, students that I knew who were in chorus last year, if they drop it now, they're not going to pick it back up again when they get to middle school, and definitely not when they get to high school. So I think increasing the ability for these students to participate at the elementary level is also very important. So that's my presentation. Thank you. Yeah.
Are there after-school programs at your elementary school?
Yeah, so things like we have Battle of the Books is one. I have done musicals, so that is an extracurricular activity. Unfortunately, we don't have time to do that during the day, so that usually requires before or after school rehearsals. I run a select choir that meets 2 days a week. It's a smaller group of 30 kids, and we work on singing slightly more challenging songs. It's made up of 4th and 5th graders. We meet before school on Mondays and Wednesdays.
And so there's no late bus for those students who want to do it?
I found out, correct. I found out recently, though, that there is a late bus. I haven't followed up on this. I just found out recently. Homework Club is a program that's done, I think, through the ELL program, and there is a late bus for that program. So it's kind of curious to see if that's something that could be figured out.
What people could hook on to.
Right, correct. And I'm sure there are factors that may prevent or dismay from that, but I think that's something that needs to be looked at and talked about. And I think too, like you said, I don't think people are aware that there are these things that happen at the elementary level. I don't know that, and even in the studies I looked at, they mostly focused on middle and high school activities, where there are more things going on. But I think getting kids hooked into doing these things early on is so important. Any other questions? Great.
Awesome. Thank you very much.